What if the very thing you crave the most is the one thing slowly destroying your success? You wake up every day with a mission, with goals to achieve, with a team relying on your leadership. But underneath it all, there's a quiet, almost comforting habit creeping in. One that you think is harmless at first. Maybe it's that extra hour of Netflix after work, the constant need to check your phone, or even indulging in snacks to cope with stress. These small pleasures feel like relief in the moment. But what happens when that relief becomes a dependency? We've all heard of addiction to substances, but there's a more subtle form: pleasure addiction. It's not about what we're doing, but how often and why we do it. Over time, this craving for quick satisfaction starts to hijack your focus, your leadership, and your ability to make decisions that matter. And worse, it's often disguised as self-care or relaxation, making it harder to recognize the damage it's causing. But here's the truth. The more you give in to those small pleasures, the less control you have over your life and your mission. This video is about uncovering how pleasure addiction sabotages your leadership and focus, two critical aspects that drive success. By the end, you'll have a clear understanding of how these seemingly innocent habits are affecting your ability to lead, and most importantly, how you can break free from this silent trap. Stick around, because the deeper you look, the more you'll realize that overcoming this addiction is the key to unlocking your true potential. Pleasure addiction doesn't show up with the flashing red lights of more obvious addictions. It sneaks in quietly, masked by things we think of as normal parts of everyday life: relaxation, entertainment, moments of reprieve from our hectic schedules. It's easy to dismiss these habits as self-care or well-deserved breaks. After all, who doesn't need a few minutes to unwind, right? But what happens when these harmless moments of indulgence start taking over your time, your energy, and your focus? And what if I told you that this addiction, while seemingly innocent, is slowly eroding your ability to lead effectively and make sharp decisions? The truth is, pleasure addiction is an incredibly subtle force. It's not about big, obvious things like drug use or excessive drinking. It's about the small, everyday indulgences we believe we have control over. It's the mindless scrolling through social media during work hours, the constant need to check your phone for messages, the hour-long binge sessions of TV shows that somehow always feel like a reward for getting through the day. At first, they seem harmless, even necessary. You tell yourself that you deserve a little pleasure, a little distraction. But the problem is, pleasure addiction slowly shifts from being an occasional indulgence to a constant need for stimulation. At the core of pleasure addiction is dopamine, the chemical in our brain that plays a role in pleasure, motivation, and reward. When we do something enjoyable, dopamine is released, making us feel good in the moment. But the more we indulge, the more our brain starts expecting that dopamine rush. What starts as an occasional need for enjoyment becomes a habitual craving, one that's harder to resist with every passing day. Over time, this shift from choice to compulsion can feel almost out of your control, leaving you trapped in a cycle of seeking more pleasure, more reward, without realizing how much it's affecting your life. Think about the last time you were in the middle of a big project or a challenging decision at work. Perhaps you had to focus and push through to meet a deadline. How easy was it to be distracted by a ping on your phone or the urge to scroll through social media? A brief moment of scrolling feels harmless, right? Just 5 minutes of catching up before getting back to work. But that 5 minutes often stretches into 15, then 30, and before you know it, hours have passed. That's how pleasure addiction starts to chip away at your focus. And when you're unable to maintain focus for extended periods, your leadership abilities suffer. As a leader, your decisions should be thoughtful and deliberate. Yet when your mind is constantly drawn to the next pleasure, the next distraction, your ability to think clearly and stay focused on your goals deteriorates. The most dangerous part of pleasure addiction is how it affects your leadership style without you even realizing it. Imagine you're leading a team and you're constantly seeking quick satisfaction, whether it's checking your phone or finding an excuse to step away for a break. The people you lead begin to notice. They start to see that you're not fully present, that your decisions are made impulsively, or that you lack the ability to handle the long hours needed to push through difficult situations. Leaders who are distracted by pleasure habits appear less committed, less reliable, and less focused. They lose credibility. Your team in turn starts to mirror that behavior. If they see you indulging in distractions, they will start to do the same. The cycle continues. Pleasure addiction also impacts decision-making on a much deeper level. As a leader, your ability to make decisions is the cornerstone of your success. But pleasure addiction clouds judgment. Instead of making decisions based on long-term goals, you start making choices based on short-term rewards. You might delay difficult decisions because they don't provide instant gratification. You might put off critical meetings or avoid conflict because you don't want to deal with the discomfort. These short-term distractions slowly erode your ability to prioritize important work, and soon, you find yourself constantly reacting to what feels good in the moment, rather than focusing on the long-term goals that will ultimately drive your success. Another hidden effect of pleasure addiction is how it affects your emotional resilience. Leaders are often the ones expected to stay calm, collected, and in control during tough times. But when pleasure addiction takes root, it chips away at your mental fortitude. Every time you give in to the urge to escape into pleasure, whether it's a quick snack or a few minutes of mindless tetiment, you're reinforcing the habit of avoiding discomfort. Over time, this makes you less able to handle stress, less able to endure challenges, and less capable of leading through adversity. True leadership is about staying composed, even when things aren't going your way. But if your default reaction to stress is to reach for an easy pleasure to numb the pain, your emotional resilience weakens. Your ability to endure tough situations deteriorates, and so does your effectiveness as a leader. There's also the issue of physical health. While we often think of pleasure addiction in terms of the mental and emotional toll it takes, the physical side effects are just as important. Leaders often rely on their energy and stamina to lead by example, but when pleasure addiction takes over, it affects your physical health too. Your body becomes dependent on these bursts of pleasure, which in turn can lead to poor habits like overeating, lack of exercise, or unhealthy coping mechanisms. You might start skipping workouts to indulge in extra time watching TV or snacking because you feel like you've earned it. These habits not only lead to physical decline, but also affect your overall energy levels, making it harder for you to keep up with the demands of leadership. When you're physically drained, it's harder to stay sharp and focused, and it becomes more difficult to perform at the level required to lead effectively. But the truth is, the more you give in to pleasure addiction, the more you reinforce a mindset of avoidance. You begin to view leadership not as a series of challenges to overcome, but as a series of distractions to escape. The more you rely on immediate gratification, the less prepared you are for the hard work, sacrifice, and focus that true leadership demands. Instead of stepping up to the plate and taking charge, you find yourself retreating into the comfort of instant pleasures. And over time, that retreat becomes a habit, a lifestyle, and a barrier to growth. Now, you might be thinking, but I need to relax. I need these moments of pleasure to recharge. And that's absolutely true. We all need moments of rest and relaxation. The problem isn't in seeking pleasure, it's in allowing those moments to control your life and your leadership. The balance lies in understanding that pleasure should be a reward, not a way of life. It should complement your work, not dominate it. The key is learning how to set boundaries with your pleasures, ensuring they don't take over your time, energy, and ability to lead. When you think of the decisions you make as a leader, you probably picture long, thoughtful deliberations, weighing pros and cons, and acting in the best interest of your team or organization. But what happens when your decision-making is no longer a thoughtful process, but a series of impulsive reactions driven by your cravings for immediate pleasure? Pleasure addiction doesn't just affect your ability to focus, it directly impacts the way you make decisions. And when your decision-making is clouded by the need for instant gratification, it has far-reaching consequences for your leadership and overall effectiveness. At first, the connection between pleasure addiction and poor decision-making might not seem obvious. After all, indulging in a moment of distraction, whether it's checking your phone or watching a TV show, doesn't seem like it would have any major impact on your leadership abilities. But here's the thing. The more you indulge in pleasure-seeking behaviors, the more you train your brain to make decisions based on what feels good in the moment, rather than on long-term goals or what's best for your team. It's a subtle shift, but it's dangerous. Over time, this behavior becomes ingrained, and you begin making decisions that favor short-term rewards over long-term results. Let's consider a simple scenario. Imagine you've just wrapped up an important meeting. You've presented your ideas, and now it's time to make some critical decisions about the direction of a project. You have a few options on the table, and the consequences of each decision are significant. But instead of taking the time to reflect, gather more information, and consult with your team, you find yourself checking your phone for messages or emails. You convince yourself that you just need a few minutes to unwind before you dive into the next step. That 5-minute break stretches into 20, and before you know it, the moment for making an important decision has passed. Instead of making a clear, thoughtful choice, you end up rushing a decision to get it out of the way, just so you can return to the comfort of distraction. This is how pleasure addiction starts to affect your decision-making, by creating a sense of urgency to fulfill your immediate needs. You begin to neglect the more thoughtful and deliberate process of decision-making. As a leader, your role is to make informed, strategic decisions that benefit your organization and those around you. But when your focus is on seeking out the next pleasure-filled moment, you lose sight of the bigger picture. The decisions you make become reactive, rather than proactive. You're no longer thinking ahead, you're simply acting on impulse. This isn't just a personal issue, it's a leadership issue. When you're constantly reacting to distractions or cravings for short-term pleasure, you start to lose your ability to anticipate the needs of your team. A leader who isn't making decisions with a clear focus on the future doesn't inspire confidence. Your team starts to notice that you're not fully present in meetings, that you're distracted during important discussions, or that your decisions seem erratic and impulsive. You lose your authority. You lose your team's trust. Your leadership starts to crumble under the weight of your inability to make clear, thoughtful decisions. The impact of pleasure addiction on decision-making doesn't just end with distracted meetings or missed opportunities. It also affects your ability to make tough calls. Leadership requires making decisions that may not always be popular, but are necessary for the greater good. Whether it's making a difficult personnel decision, re-evaluating a project that isn't working, or cutting costs to stay afloat, tough decisions are part of the job. But when your brain is constantly seeking pleasure, you begin to shy away from the discomfort of those hard choices. You start to put them off because they don't offer immediate relief. You avoid difficult conversations or delay critical actions because in that moment, they don't bring the pleasure you're looking for. This is where pleasure addiction becomes truly dangerous for leaders. It not only compromises your ability to make decisions, but it also erodes your ability to face challenges head-on. As a leader, you must be able to step into discomfort, to make decisions that may not feel good in the moment, but are necessary for long-term success. But if you're constantly reaching for that quick hit of pleasure, you start to lose the ability to tolerate discomfort. The more you avoid tough decisions, the more they pile up, creating an environment where you're no longer making decisions, you're letting them happen to you. One of the most damaging effects of pleasure addiction on decision-making is the toll it takes on your ability to manage long-term goals. Leadership isn't just about making decisions in the present, it's about thinking ahead, anticipating challenges, and setting your team or organization up for future success. But when pleasure addiction has a hold of you, your vision narrows. You start to make decisions based on immediate relief rather than long-term outcomes. This isn't just about missing out on the big picture, it's about actively undermining your future success. Imagine you've been working on a long-term project that requires months of planning, hard work, and strategic thinking. In the early stages, everything feels great. You're excited about the possibilities and the long-term benefits seem clear. But as time goes on, the pressures build, and you start to feel the weight of the project. The deadlines loom and the stress mounts. At the same time, the desire for quick pleasures grows. Maybe it's a new episode of your favorite show, a trip to the coffee shop, or just checking out what's happening on social media. The more you indulge, the more you delay the difficult work required to push the project forward. As a result, you start to make decisions that delay or derail progress on the project. Instead of facing the difficult aspects head-on, you choose the easier path, the one that offers immediate satisfaction. You put off the hard work, choosing instant gratification over the long-term payoff. The project suffers, and so does your leadership credibility. The longer you indulge in these habits, the harder it becomes to make decisions that truly align with your long-term vision. In a world where leaders are expected to not only make decisions but also inspire and guide others toward a shared goal, pleasure addiction becomes a serious obstacle. It makes you less reliable, less focused, and less capable of leading with clarity and purpose. Your team looks to you for direction, and when you're distracted by constant cravings for pleasure, they start to lose trust in your ability to lead. Your decisions become less strategic, less informed, and more reactionary. The result, a leadership style that feels disconnected from the bigger picture, from long-term goals, and from the values that drive success. But here's the thing. Pleasure addiction doesn't have to control your life. Recognizing the impact it's having on your decision-making is the first step to breaking free. Once you acknowledge how these small indulgences are shaping your choices, you can start to take back control. By setting clear boundaries, focusing on your long-term vision, and making intentional decisions about when and how to indulge, you can rebuild your ability to lead with clarity and purpose. As a leader, your authority is not just a title or a position, it's the respect you earn through consistent actions, clear communication, and a steadfast ability to lead with purpose. But what happens when your ability to lead is compromised by pleasure addiction? When the craving for immediate satisfaction begins to dictate your choices, your actions, and your interactions, you start to lose the very qualities that make you an effective leader. Pleasure addiction doesn't just affect your decision-making or focus, it directly impacts your leadership authority. And once that happens, regaining the respect and trust of your team becomes an uphill battle. Leadership is about more than just making decisions. It's about demonstrating integrity, setting an example, and earning the respect of those around you. When your behavior is dictated by the need for instant gratification, you start to appear unreliable, inconsistent, and disengaged from the goals at hand. Think about a leader who is constantly distracted by their phone, stepping away from important discussions to check notifications, or retreating into distractions during stressful moments. Over time, those small indulgences erode trust. Your team begins to notice that you're not fully present, that your attention is divided, and that you're not leading with the level of commitment they expect from someone in your position. But it goes beyond just being distracted. When you're addicted to the cycle of pleasure-seeking behaviors, it sends a message to those around you that the pursuit of comfort and convenience is more important than the work at hand. And as a leader, this is one of the most damaging things you can do. Leadership requires resilience, the ability to stay the course even when things get tough, and the capacity to make tough decisions for the greater good. But when your first instinct is to seek out relief from discomfort through pleasure, you stop demonstrating those crucial leadership qualities. Instead of leading by example, you become a reflection of the very behaviors that undermine your authority. This shift is subtle, but it has a profound effect on your leadership credibility. As a leader, your role is to inspire others to follow you, to trust that you have a clear vision, that you are committed to the long-term success of the team, and that you will make decisions that are in the best interest of the group. But when you're constantly seeking short-term pleasure, you start to lose the ability to inspire that trust. Your actions become erratic, your leadership inconsistent, and your ability to guide your team through challenges weakens. The more you indulge in distractions, the more your authority slips away, and before long, you find yourself in a position where others no longer look to you for guidance. Let's take a closer look at how this dynamic plays out in real-life scenarios. Imagine you're leading a team through a particularly challenging project. There are tight deadlines, high expectations, and pressure from higher-ups. As the leader, you are expected to provide clarity, make decisions quickly, and keep your team motivated through the tough times. But instead of stepping up and leading with confidence, you find yourself distracted by the need to check your phone, retreating into social media, or even heading out for a quick break to escape the stress. At first, your team may not notice, but over time, as these small distractions become more frequent, they begin to see the pattern. They notice that you're not present during meetings, that your decisions lack conviction, and that you seem more focused on finding relief than on driving the project forward. This behavior chips away at your credibility. As a leader, your team depends on you to stay calm under pressure, to make tough calls, and to lead by example. But when you're constantly indulging in small pleasures to avoid discomfort, you fail to demonstrate the strength and resilience that are expected from someone in your position. The more you give in to these distractions, the less your team sees you as a reliable figure to follow. They start to question your commitment, your focus, and ultimately, your ability to lead them to success. The loss of leadership authority due to pleasure addiction is a gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight, but the impact is cumulative. Each time you choose pleasure over productivity, each time you prioritize short-term comfort over long-term goals, you reinforce the idea that you're not fully committed to the work at hand. And as your actions become more inconsistent, so does your influence as a leader. The team starts to lose trust in your decisions, and in some cases they may even begin to follow their own desires for pleasure, mirroring the very behaviors you've modeled. This creates a cycle of disengagement and lack of accountability, where everyone is simply trying to escape the discomfort of hard work by seeking the next distraction. And as a leader, you're no longer in a position to break that cycle because you've become just as entrenched in it as your team. It's important to remember that leadership isn't about being perfect. No one expects you to always be calm, collected, and fully in control. We all have our moments of weakness, and we all need breaks to recharge. But when pleasure addiction becomes a habit, when it starts dictating your behavior on a regular basis, it signals to your team that you're not fully invested in the role you've been given. And that's when your leadership authority begins to erode. Once respect is lost, it's incredibly difficult to regain. It takes time, consistency, and a clear demonstration of commitment to rebuild the trust that has been lost. The key to maintaining strong leadership in the face of pleasure addiction is self-awareness and discipline. You must recognize when you're slipping into the cycle of indulgence and make the conscious decision to prioritize the long-term goals of your team and organization over short-term pleasures. This requires a level of self-control and focus that many leaders struggle with, especially in high-pressure environments. But the leaders who succeed are the ones who can resist the pull of instant gratification and remain focused on the bigger picture. They understand that true leadership is about more than just the moment. It's about the impact you have over time, the trust you build, and the results you deliver. So, how can you reclaim your leadership authority and stop pleasure addiction from sabotaging your role? Start by setting clear boundaries for yourself. Identify the moments when you're most likely to reach for pleasure, whether it's during stressful meetings, when you feel overwhelmed, or when things aren't going as planned, and find healthier ways to cope. Instead of turning to distractions, take a walk, meditate, or engage in something that requires your full attention, but doesn't provide instant gratification. These small shifts can make a huge difference in how you show up as a leader. But it's not just about avoiding distractions, it's also about setting an example for your team. Your behavior sets the tone for the rest of your team. If you're constantly distracted by pleasure-seeking habits, your team will follow suit. But if you demonstrate discipline, focus, and resilience, your team will be more likely to adopt those same qualities. Leadership isn't just about making decisions, it's about modeling the behavior you expect from others. By taking control of your own habits, you create a culture of discipline and focus within your team, and in turn, you rebuild your authority as a leader. As a leader, your ability to focus is your most valuable asset. It's the foundation of your success. Every decision you make, every strategy you implement, and every interaction with your team requires your full attention and mental clarity. But what happens when your focus is consistently hijacked by the need for instant pleasure? What happens when your brain, instead of staying fixed on long-term goals, begins to crave the next dopamine hit, the next distraction, the next moment of relief? The results can be disastrous, not just for you but for your entire team and organization. Pleasure addiction doesn't just affect your leadership style or decision-making, it directly impacts your ability to concentrate, stay on task, and push through challenges. This kind of addiction is insidious because it doesn't look like the other more obvious addictions. There's no substance abuse or extreme behavior. Instead, it's the small, seemingly harmless distractions that pull you away from your work. It could be the constant checking of your phone, getting lost in a few minutes of social media scrolling, or taking breaks to watch another episode of a TV show. These habits don't seem harmful at first. After all, everyone needs a little time to unwind. But the problem is that these distractions break your focus, disrupt your workflow, and over time, reduce your ability to concentrate for long periods. And for a leader, that can be a killer. Think about the last time you tried to concentrate on an important task. Maybe it was preparing a presentation, writing a report, or planning a strategy for your team. How long did you stay on task before you were pulled away by the urge to check your phone or take a quick break? What started as a brief moment of relief quickly turned into a pattern, and before you knew it, hours had passed without making significant progress. Each time you indulge in that moment of pleasure, whether it's checking your social media, watching a quick video, or grabbing a snack, your brain releases a burst of dopamine. This feels good in the moment, but it also creates a craving for more. And every time you indulge that craving, you're reinforcing the habit, making it harder to focus on your work and your responsibilities as a leader. The problem is that this habit doesn't just disrupt your current task, it has a long-term impact on your ability to focus in general. The more you give in to the impulse to indulge in pleasure, the more your brain gets used to the constant switching between tasks. This is called task switching, and while it might seem like you're multitasking, it's actually draining your mental energy and reducing your overall productivity. Each time you switch tasks, your brain has to refocus and re-engage, which takes time and energy. The more often you switch between tasks, the less efficient you become at completing any one task. And as a leader, this is a significant problem. Your ability to focus on one thing at a time, to be fully present in each moment, is critical for making decisions, solving problems, and guiding your team to success. Pleasure addiction also impacts your cognitive functions. Studies have shown that excessive indulgence in pleasure-seeking activities can impair the brain's ability to process information and remember important details. This is especially damaging for a leader who is expected to retain information, make informed decisions, and lead with a clear vision. When your brain is constantly distracted, it struggles to retain the information you need to do your job effectively. You might find yourself forgetting important details, missing critical deadlines, or failing to recall key facts when making decisions. This makes you less reliable and less effective as a leader, and it damages your credibility with your team. One of the most insidious effects of pleasure addiction on focus is that it leads to a gradual decline in attention span. Research has shown that the more we indulge in instant gratification, whether it's through social media, gaming, or other distractions, the shorter our attention spans become. This means that what once might have been a 30-minute focused work session now feels unbearable after just 10 minutes. You're constantly looking for something else, something that provides immediate pleasure, rather than staying focused on the task at hand. This is a dangerous cycle, because as your attention span shrinks, you become less capable of managing the complex tasks and decisions that come with leadership. The decline in focus caused by pleasure addiction isn't just about distractions. It's also about the mental fatigue that comes from constantly seeking relief. When you're constantly looking for ways to escape the discomfort of hard work, whether it's through checking your phone, watching videos, or snacking, you're not giving your brain the opportunity to recharge in a meaningful way. Instead, you're draining your mental resources, making it harder to stay sharp and focused over time. This mental fatigue compounds itself, creating a vicious cycle where the more you indulge in pleasure, the less focused and energized you feel. It's a downward spiral that can be incredibly difficult to break, especially when your brain starts to crave that instant gratification more and more. This issue is compounded by the pressure and demands placed on leaders. As a leader, you're expected to be at your best, to remain focused, to manage multiple tasks at once, and to solve problems quickly. But when you're constantly distracted by the need for pleasure, you start to lose the mental clarity required to perform these tasks effectively. You may find yourself procrastinating, avoiding difficult decisions, or rushing through tasks just to get them done. Anything to return to that feeling of relief. And when you're in this state, it becomes much harder to keep your team on track, because they can sense your lack of focus. They may begin to question your decisions, your commitment, and your ability to lead them through challenges. The most effective leaders are the ones who can stay calm under pressure, who can remain focused on the task at hand, and who can prioritize long-term success over short-term relief. But pleasure addiction makes that nearly impossible. When your brain is conditioned to seek out instant gratification, it becomes harder to focus on the long-term goals that truly matter. Instead of thinking strategically and working toward big-picture success, you're just trying to get through the day, looking for the next moment of pleasure to relieve the stress or discomfort of hard work. So, what can you do to break the cycle and regain control of your focus? The first step is awareness. Recognizing that pleasure addiction is affecting your ability to focus is crucial. You need to acknowledge that these small distractions are adding up, that they're making it harder for you to lead effectively, and that they're reducing your productivity. Once you've recognized the problem, you can start to implement strategies to reduce the impact of these distractions. Set boundaries for yourself. Limit the time you spend on social media. Check your phone only at specific intervals, and create an environment that encourages focus. Instead of constantly seeking pleasure, find healthy ways to recharge your mind. Whether it's through exercise, meditation, or engaging in a hobby that doesn't rely on instant gratification. It's also important to practice mindfulness and self-discipline. Whenever you feel the urge to indulge in pleasure, take a moment to pause, breathe, and refocus on the task at hand. Over time, these small changes can help you rebuild your ability to focus and improve your leadership effectiveness. Pleasure addiction, as subtle as it may seem, carries with it a dangerous cost, one that goes beyond a simple loss of focus or a decline in productivity. It erodes not only your decision-making and leadership authority, but also your sense of purpose. As a leader, your sense of purpose is everything. It's the driving force behind your vision, your work ethic, and your ability to push through challenges. It's what fuels your motivation and gives your efforts meaning. But when you fall into the trap of pleasure addiction, you begin to lose touch with that core sense of purpose. And when that happens, your leadership falters. Purpose is what keeps you moving forward, even when things are tough. It's what inspires you to wake up every day, to set ambitious goals, and to keep going, even when the road gets difficult. But when your mind is constantly distracted by the need for pleasure, whether it's scrolling through social media, watching TV, eating for comfort, or indulging in any other form of immediate gratification, you stop thinking about the long-term vision. You begin to lose sight of your goals. Instead of focusing on what really matters, you find yourself focusing on the next pleasure-filled moment that provides temporary relief from the stress of leadership. And as you slip into this cycle, your sense of purpose becomes weaker, making it harder to stay motivated and committed to your goals. The first thing that happens when pleasure addiction begins to erode your sense of purpose is that you start to prioritize comfort over challenge. As a leader, challenges are part of the job, whether it's dealing with difficult team members, navigating complex problems, or pushing through tough times. Leadership requires embracing discomfort. But when you're constantly seeking pleasure, discomfort becomes something to avoid at all costs. The result, you start to shy away from difficult decisions, hard conversations, and the actions that are required to achieve meaningful success. Instead of pushing through the tough stuff, you find yourself retreating into the safety of pleasure, where there are no challenges and no risks. This avoidance of discomfort can be incredibly damaging. Leadership requires the ability to make difficult decisions, to face uncomfortable truths, and to push your team toward achieving goals, even when it feels hard. But when your brain is conditioned to avoid discomfort in favor of pleasure, you begin to lose that resilience. You stop confronting the issues that need attention, and instead you bury yourself in distractions that only provide temporary relief. The longer this pattern continues, the more disconnected you become from your sense of purpose. And the more you detach from your purpose, the more you lose the drive to keep going when things get tough. Pleasure addiction also makes it harder to engage in long-term thinking. As a leader, your job isn't just to put out fires, it's to think strategically about the future and to make decisions that will set you and your team up for success. But when you're constantly seeking out the next moment of pleasure, you're too focused on the present to plan for the future. Instead of thinking about the big picture, you become bogged down by the immediate distractions that bring you short-term satisfaction. This mindset shift makes it nearly impossible to stay committed to long-term goals, because your brain is conditioned to prioritize short-term rewards. Your ability to think strategically and stay focused on long-term outcomes diminishes, and with it, your leadership capacity. Think about how this plays out in a practical setting. You're working on a project that requires months of planning, collaboration, and effort. But as soon as you hit a roadblock or encounter a difficult task, the urge to escape into pleasure becomes irresistible. Maybe you check your phone for a few minutes, or take a quick break to watch something on TV. What starts as a brief distraction ends up becoming a pattern. The more you retreat into these moments of instant gratification, the less motivated you are to return to the project at hand. The tasks pile up, and your sense of purpose becomes harder and harder to grasp. Instead of feeling inspired by the work and the long-term rewards that will come from it, you feel drained, disconnected, and unmotivated. This disconnection from purpose, also impacts the way you lead others. A leader who is disengaged from their own purpose is less likely to inspire purpose in others. Your team looks to you for guidance, for a clear vision, and for the motivation to keep pushing forward. But when you're constantly distracted by the search for pleasure, you stop providing that guidance. You stop motivating your team to strive for excellence. Instead, you lead by example and disengagement, and your team begins to mirror that behavior. The result is a disengaged team with no clear sense of purpose, working only for the next short-term reward, rather than for long-term success. But the worst part of all this is the toll it takes on your well-being. As a leader, your emotional and mental state sets the tone for your entire organization. When you lose touch with your purpose, you begin to lose touch with yourself. You stop feeling driven by your passions and start feeling drained by the demands of leadership. Instead of finding fulfillment in the work you do, you begin to see it as just another task to get through, so you can return to the comfort of your next pleasure. Over time, this takes a toll on your mental health, your resilience, and your overall well-being. You begin to feel disconnected not only from your goals, but from the people you lead. Now, it might seem like breaking free from pleasure addiction is impossible, but the truth is that it's not. The first step in reclaiming your sense of purpose is acknowledging that pleasure addiction is affecting your leadership. You need to recognize the ways in which you've been avoiding discomfort, seeking out pleasure, and letting that behavior interfere with your goals. Once you've done that, you can begin to take intentional steps to reconnect with your purpose. Start by setting boundaries for your pleasure-seeking habits. Limit the amount of time you spend on distractions like social media or TV. Set specific times for breaks, but make sure they don't interfere with your ability to focus on the tasks at hand. You need to retrain your brain to focus on the long-term rewards, not the immediate satisfaction that comes from distractions. This will take time and effort, but it's worth it if you want to reclaim your leadership power and your sense of purpose. It's also important to remind yourself of why you started in the first place. What drove you to pursue leadership? What are the bigger goals you're working toward? Reconnect with that vision and use it as a source of motivation. Focus on the impact you want to have, not just on your own success, but on the people around you. When you remember why you're doing what you're doing, you'll find it easier to push through the discomfort and stay connected to your purpose. As a leader, your ability to handle stress is one of the most important traits you can possess. It's what helps you maintain clarity in difficult situations, make tough decisions under pressure, and guide your team with confidence when things get chaotic. But what happens when your approach to stress begins to shift? What happens when instead of facing stress head-on, you find yourself retreating into distractions or seeking immediate relief through pleasure? This is where pleasure addiction begins to undermine not just your focus, but your resilience. Stress management, or lack thereof, has a profound effect on your leadership. And when pleasure addiction starts to play a role in how you deal with stress, it can completely change the way you lead. Pleasure addiction, as we've seen, isn't just about indulgence, it's about seeking comfort and relief, especially when things get tough. When you experience stress, the natural instinct is to find ways to manage it. But instead of dealing with the issue directly, pleasure addiction can trick you into thinking that escaping into temporary distractions is the solution. Whether it's mindlessly scrolling through social media, binge-watching a TV show, eating comfort food, or even indulging in shopping or other habits that bring temporary relief. These actions are quick fixes that provide a momentary sense of relief from the stress you're experiencing. But the problem is, they don't solve the underlying issues. They don't address the root causes of stress, nor do they help you build resilience to deal with challenges in a healthy way. Over time, these moments of escape become a crutch, and instead of learning how to manage stress effectively, you become reliant on pleasure to help you cope. At first, this might not seem like a big deal. After all, everyone needs a break now and then, right? Taking time to recharge and relax is a natural part of life. But the issue arises when those moments of relaxation start to become the primary way you deal with stress. Instead of using healthy methods like exercise, meditation, or talking things through with a colleague or mentor, you turn to distractions. This constant reliance on pleasure to relieve stress weakens your emotional resilience. Leaders who aren't able to effectively manage their stress don't inspire confidence in their teams. When you constantly turn to distractions rather than tackling challenges head-on, Your team begins to notice. They see that you're avoiding the hard work and the tough conversations that need to happen. They see that you're withdrawing when you should be stepping up. One of the key aspects of leadership is the ability to remain calm and composed, even in high-pressure situations. Leaders who handle stress well are able to think clearly, make decisions quickly, and provide a sense of direction for their team. But when your brain is conditioned to seek instant gratification, whether through food, entertainment, or social media, you start to lose that ability to stay composed. Instead of tackling the problem, you focus on the next small pleasure that will temporarily relieve your stress. The problem with this approach is that it prevents you from developing the coping mechanisms and emotional intelligence necessary to handle the pressure of leadership. And as you fall into this cycle, it becomes more and more difficult to break free. Stress doesn't just affect you as a leader, it affects your entire organization. When you, as the leader, are constantly looking for ways to escape stress, your team begins to feel the impact. They look to you for direction, but if you're too distracted or disengaged to provide that, they start to feel lost. Your behavior sets the tone for your entire team. If they see you constantly turning to distractions for relief, they may start to do the same. This undermines your ability to lead with strength and resilience, and it weakens your team's ability to perform under pressure. What begins as a personal issue with managing stress quickly turns into a problem for the whole organization. But there's another layer to the issue. When you rely on pleasure as a way to cope with stress, you're not giving yourself the tools to handle stress in a productive way. Instead of learning to process your emotions, manage your time, and find solutions to the challenges you face, you're relying on temporary relief that only pushes the problem further down the road. This not only makes it harder to manage future stress, but it also prevents you from growing as a leader. Leadership requires emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize your own emotions and those of others, and to use that awareness to guide your decisions and interactions. When you indulge in pleasure to avoid stress, you prevent yourself from developing that emotional intelligence. You start to numb yourself to the stress, rather than dealing with it in a way that promotes growth, understanding, and positive change. The long-term impact of this pattern is profound. As time goes on, you become more dependent on external sources of pleasure to manage stress. Your ability to cope with pressure diminishes, and instead of growing into a more resilient and resourceful leader, you become increasingly reactive and disengaged. What you don't realize is that the constant need for pleasure to soothe your stress is slowly draining your energy and motivation. Instead of feeling empowered by overcoming challenges, you begin to feel overwhelmed and exhausted by the constant cycle of seeking relief. You stop seeing challenges as opportunities for growth and start seeing them as burdens you'd rather avoid. This is a dangerous place for a leader to be. When you lose the ability to handle stress, you lose the ability to lead effectively. Your team needs you to be a steady hand, someone who can navigate challenges with composure and strength. But when you're relying on pleasure to manage your emotions, you're no longer able to provide that leadership. You may feel like you're escaping stress, but what you're really doing is allowing it to control you. The more you give in to the cycle of distraction and instant gratification, the more you allow stress to dominate your life and your leadership. It becomes a vicious cycle where the more you seek relief, the less capable you are of managing the pressure of leadership. So how do you break free from this cycle? The first step is recognizing the role that pleasure addiction plays in your stress management. You need to admit that relying on distractions to cope with stress is preventing you from developing the emotional resilience and leadership skills you need to succeed. Once you've identified the issue, you can start to make intentional changes in how you deal with stress. Instead of turning to distractions, find healthier ways to manage stress. Exercise is one of the most effective ways to release tension and improve your mood. Physical activity helps to reduce the effects of stress, clear your mind, and boost your energy. Meditation and mindfulness are also powerful tools for managing stress. By practicing mindfulness, you can train yourself to stay present and focused, even in difficult situations. You can also talk to a mentor, coach, or therapist who can help you process your stress and develop better coping mechanisms. By focusing on these healthier ways of managing stress, you'll begin to strengthen your emotional resilience and reclaim control over your leadership. Instead of avoiding discomfort, you'll learn to embrace it as a natural part of the leadership journey. You'll start to see stress as an opportunity for growth rather than a problem to be solved with distractions. And by doing so, you'll become a stronger, more effective leader, who can inspire and guide your team through even the toughest challenges. By now, you've seen how pleasure addiction subtly infiltrates your leadership, weakening your focus, decision-making, and authority. But here's the truth. It's not a cycle you're stuck in forever. Breaking free is possible, and it all starts with recognizing the signs and taking control. The good news is that the very behaviors that are hindering your leadership can be reshaped with intentional effort and the right mindset. The key is to take back control of your habits and focus on what truly matters. Breaking free from pleasure addiction begins with acknowledging that it's a problem. This means taking a hard look at the small pleasures that dominate your life. The distractions you turn to when things get tough, or when you need a quick mental break. Whether it's scrolling endlessly through your phone, binge-watching shows to escape, or using food or other habits to cope with stress, all of these distractions are signs that you're relying on pleasure for relief rather than facing challenges head-on. Acknowledging this is the first step toward reclaiming your leadership. Once you recognize the problem, the next step is setting clear boundaries. Start by limiting the time you spend on distractions. For example, set specific times for checking your phone, or designate certain days for relaxation, making sure that these moments don't consume your entire day. It's about finding balance and being disciplined with your time. Instead of giving in to the urge for instant gratification, commit to spending more time on activities that will fuel your long-term success, whether it's working on a project, spending time with your team, or reflecting on your leadership goals. It's also crucial to shift your mindset. Instead of viewing leadership as a constant stream of challenges and distractions, try to see these moments as opportunities for growth. When stress or discomfort arise, use them as chances to build resilience, not retreat into temporary relief. This mindset shift will not only make you a more effective leader, but also help you manage stress in healthier ways. You'll begin to feel more energized and focused, with a clearer sense of purpose driving your decisions and actions. Another key aspect of breaking free from pleasure addiction is accountability. Share your goals and progress with a trusted colleague, coach, or mentor who can help you stay on track. Leadership isn't just about taking control of your own habits. It's also about fostering a culture of responsibility and growth within your team. By modeling self-discipline and focusing on long-term goals, you set an example for others to follow. The most important thing to remember is that change takes time, but it's worth it. Breaking free from the cycle of pleasure addiction won't happen overnight, but every small step you take toward regaining your focus, discipline, and leadership authority will have a lasting impact. By taking control of your habits, you not only improve your own leadership, but inspire those around you to do the same. Reclaiming your leadership isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Take it one step at a time, and remember, the more you focus on your long-term goals, the more your leadership will thrive. In conclusion, pleasure addiction might seem harmless at first, but it slowly chips away at your ability to lead with focus, clarity, and purpose. What begins as a harmless indulgence or a brief escape from stress turns into a cycle that weakens your decision-making, erodes your authority, and distracts you from your goals. As a leader, the consequences are far-reaching, not just for you but for your team and your organization. But the good news is, you don't have to stay trapped in this cycle. You have the power to break free and take control. The first step is acknowledging the impact that pleasure addiction is having on your leadership. Recognize the habits and distractions that are pulling you away from your responsibilities and your long-term vision. Once you see the problem clearly, you can start making intentional changes. Set boundaries for your pleasure-seeking habits and commit to activities that promote growth, productivity, and resilience. The more you focus on your long-term goals, the more your leadership will improve. Breaking free from pleasure addiction isn't just about avoiding distractions. It's about creating a mindset shift. Instead of seeking immediate relief from stress, learn to embrace discomfort as a path to growth. When challenges arise, use them as opportunities to build resilience and sharpen your leadership skills. By doing so, you'll not only strengthen your own leadership abilities, but inspire your team to do the same. Accountability, both with yourself and with others, plays a key role in this transformation. Share your progress with a mentor, coach, or trusted colleague to help you stay focused and on track. Leadership isn't about perfection, it's about consistency and progress. The more you prioritize long-term goals over short-term pleasures, the more effective and resilient you'll become. You won't be perfect overnight, but every small step you take will make a significant difference in your leadership journey. Remember, the true measure of leadership isn't how often you escape into pleasure, but how you face challenges, make tough decisions, and remain focused on the big picture. Ultimately, breaking free from pleasure addiction is about reclaiming your power as a leader. It's about being fully present, staying focused on what truly matters, and leading with purpose. As you start to take control of your habits, you'll find that your leadership thrives, your team grows, and your goals become more achievable. So take that first step today. It's never too late to shift your mindset, break the cycle, and become the leader you were always meant to be.